Hi, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I am Beth Galella from Bristol-Myers Squibb and a member of the IQ Pediatric Working Group, and I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers today. Jeffrey Gray is a predictive analytics data scientist at the Center for Pediatric Data Science and Analytic Methodology at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. Dr. Gray earned his BS in chemistry and PhD in computational chemistry from the University of South Florida, specializing in molecular dynamics and enhanced sampling of biomolecules. Dr. Gray's current research focuses on methodology development in artificial intelligence, improving healthcare equity, and development of models for clinical decision support. Prior to joining Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital, Dr. Gray was a modeling and simulation subject matter expert in the defense industry. He worked on the Raytheon Ship Self-Defense System, a combat management system for the Navy. While at Lockheed Martin, Dr. Gray focused on combat system performance, digital twin technology, laser weapon systems, and artificial intelligence. Dr. Ahmada is a director of Health Data Science and Analytics, Director, Center for Pediatric Data Science and Analytic Methodology at the Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital as well, and assistant professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Prior, Dr. Ahumada was the chief data science manager for the Enterprise Advanced Analytics Department at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. His primary area of interest is the research and development of practical and novel solutions toward the mining of large data sets, the design of information visualization tools, and implementation of predictive models based on electronic health record systems, with the aim to implement practical clinical decision support applications. Since first working with GlaxoSmithKline in the Knowledge Discovery and Databases Group as a computer scientist, he has successfully helped with the design, development, and implementation and research of data science projects, which include predictive and classification models using EMR and data streams. I would also like to introduce Daniel Schaufelberger, who will say a few words to set the stage for our speaker topics today. Daniel became a pharmacist by training back in Switzerland and has retired from J&J Janssen after 25 years of CMC leadership in pediatric product development. He is currently an independent consultant and an invited guest member of the IQ Pediatric Working Group. Since last year, Daniel is an adjunct assistant professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine at All Children's Hospital in St. Petersburg, Florida. Thank you, and I would like to turn it over to Daniel.
Good morning, good afternoon. This is Daniel Schaufelberger speaking. Thank you for joining our webinar today on artificial intelligence and machine learning, what I consider a very hot topic that we also see more and more applications even in our daily lives. On the other hand, I feel that we have not seen that much such applications in pediatric formulation development and research, an area that is of interest to many or most of you joining us today. So we would like to change that. And one reason for that is to organize this webinar. And we also have created now a sub-team on AI and machine learning, part of our IQ Pediatric Working Group. And I would like to invite you to join this sub-team if your company is a member of the IQ Consortium. So today we would like to make a call for action and learn first from experts in clinical research and other fields to kind of challenge us, to stimulate our thinking. And then I make a pledge that a year from now, we will organize a follow-on webinar where we then hope that your research, your applications of AI and ML can then be featured and shown to an audience. With that, I would like to now hand over to our speakers, starting with Louise, and then followed by Jeffrey, colleagues from Johns Hopkins. Louise, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. All right, so as part of the agreement, we're going to take the webcam off, so we're going to take less bandwidth for doing so. All right. So the idea of our presentation here is to give you a quick introduction of the field, but at the same time give you an introduction of what the things that we have been working on here that are Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. So I'm going to start with this quote in here from Sundar Pichai, which is really interesting from the point of view of the Industrial Revolution. So we are in the fourth Industrial Revolution right now. You have, take into account the last three, starting with the steam, and then going to the electronics, and finally the IT system. So here now, data is the new gold, and the ways that to take care of that is through the new methods that we call machine learning and AI, right? So here quickly we're going to describe what AI is in terms of where it falls. We have this big circle here, which is artificial intelligence, which encompasses different fields, including robotics, machine learning, deep learning, and we have on the left-hand side what is called the big data. So big data is a definition that depends on the audience and who's working with data. It will be big, right? So for personal purposes, big data means my photos, and my audio files, and I have to buy a terabyte, and that's big data, right? For the hospital here, maybe going into 20 terabytes of data, that will be big data, and we have to adapt to that. But for Facebook, it's more than that. We're talking about petabytes of data. Moving forward, enabling the technology in those terms and crossing the fields of machine learning, artificial intelligence, deep learning, and big data is where the solutions are going to be really interesting. So the popularity of machine learning over time, you can see on the graph on the left, since 1988, we have seen an increase of new algorithms coming out on the studies. So here we have, it's just incredible the amount of publications and interest on this field. But on the right-hand side of the screen here in this slide, there's a seminal paper on backpropagation by Hinton et al. In 2006, which actually started the whole revolution for machine learning. Here is what we call traditional machine learning. So it's basically, this is a kind of poll that we have before, and is how many people voted, what they know about is logistic regression, Bayesian networks, random forest, support vector machine, and expert systems, and that is kind of a percentage that we in different presentations we have done. And as you can see, random forest is one of the popular one. Expert systems go back into the 1980s, and that's what we call today traditional machine learning, right? So what is the new machine learning? So we have, starting with deep learning, reinforcement learning, convolutional neural networks, and GAN, generative adversarial networks. So those are the new techniques and methods that actually are moving or helping to move the industry even faster than in the past. So we're going to start with what is the ML definition. I'm not going to read it for you. Basically, we published this paper some time ago, and in here it's just a very short version of what we believe it is the right version. So here's another slide that tells us about the predicting the future in big data and machine learning and clinical medicine. So here, big data, people believe maybe 10 years ago that is going to transform the industry or every industry. Not really. Data itself is useless, and that's right. We know that. What is useful is to take that data, analyze, interpret on, and act on. And for that, we need algorithms, right? And this paper, they basically said is the algorithms that we are going to work on, the design is going to prove transformative. So we have here another paper that has been published from our own faculty here, Dr. Fackler, Dr. Rehman, Dr. Winslow, that talk about please welcome the new team member, the algorithm. So it is inevitable that in medicine, we're going to have the algorithm not to compete with the physicians, but to help them make better decisions. Here's an example of one tool that we developed here at Johns Hopkins All Children's, and that was based on a registry that we took and actually developed a calculator that if you, sorry about that, that if you want to know what is the risk of mortality for patients, you can put the information in here. This is another example in here for craniosynostosis. On the left-hand side, you will see what is a normal skull. On the right-hand side, you will see what are the problems that are presented. And we develop a calculator to know what will be the right amount of blood that it will require for this surgery, and also what will be the right combination of blood products for these patients. And that was using, on both cases, machine learning. Here's a screenshot of our user interface module. Also, this one is a real-time machine learning solution that actually kind of predicts or help us predict which, if the tube, when the patients are intubated, if it's in the right place or not, is not in the right place. And we use the data that is generated by the monitors when the patient is connected in the hospital in the OR to actually know that. This is, if you think in terms of when it's going to be useful, this is not going to be useful for an expert anesthesiologist, but it's going to be useful for the people who are studying the field and other countries. Here, it was the use of natural language processing, NLP, for DVTs, and actually we created this one in terms of the state of Pennsylvania. When I was at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, we needed to submit certain reports on the DVTs, and an FTE was spending about a full year just trying to get the information from the reports. And in those terms, we took all of that data, used NLP, and created the same report in an automated way. Here is a slide which I really recommend for all the audience to look at. It is important to see here that the majority of this algorithms that have been developed in the field of medicine are going into radiology, and there is a reason for that. The field of artificial intelligence and machine learning, specifically on the deep learning side, has gone through image, and is coming from the image world, and is really, really good at that, and has become one of the main tools in medicine that actually is working really well. Now we're going to talk about the benefits and risks of using machine learning, of course, in medicine. So one of the main things that we have to talk about machine learning in medicine is the cost, the safety, and the quality, right? These are three things that we need to aim. If we're using technologies like that, we need to be able to say and demonstrate that we're reducing cost, that we increase in safety, and therefore the quality of care is going to be up. If we don't have these three components in there, then what we're using or trying to adapt or adopt the technology, we're going to be failing. Risks, over-promising what the technology will deliver. So I think everyone is familiar by now what IBM did with the Watson technology, and the whole problem with MD Anderson, they spent about $62 million and didn't get anything but a obsolete expert system. However, after that debacle, a lot of things had happened, and they have developed other technology and improved that. But that was basically IBM over-promising something that did not happen at the time. It was maybe about 10 years ago. So we have to be very careful. What are the solutions, how we promote, how we market these solutions out there, because once we have done that, people are going to believe that they work, and if they don't, then they're going to say the machine learning is not working, right? Another risk is the bias risk. In here, that was for Google, who actually created a labeling algorithm for images, and it took two gorillas pictures and label them as African American. So they fixed the algorithm, but again, it's an implied bias that we have to take care of that. And also, we need to make sure before we put it out there in the real world, make sure that we have seen or take care of all the problems that maybe can cause this technology. Now, another risk is for privacy. So in here is basically a lot of the things that we can use to reverse engineer some of the data. We can go back and find out using geographical data and all the demographic data and find out who are the people who we're collecting data from. And there are very, very a lot of examples in those fields. Now let's talk about the benefits, right? So from the benefits point of view, we have seen, again, these are 3 examples in here for machine learning solutions that have been working really well. The one on the top is for dermatology. So we have many applications that today, by taking a picture with your cell phone or specialized equipment also, but not that expensive, we can find out if you have some risk for cancer. On the right-hand side, we have for breast cancer as well. We're using a lot of technology in that. And the image at the bottom is basically for retinopathy that has been deployed or was deployed by Google some years ago, and now is another company called IDX who has done a remarkable solution with that technology and is really working well. Now here, for the things that we have built here, we were tasked with a project to create a readmissions model. So for those that are not clinical training, when you go to the hospital and they take care of you, you are not supposed to go back and be treated for the same problem. So that is what is called a readmission. And there are readmissions that occur during 30 days period, or a 14-day period, or a 7-day period here. So for the task that we have here at hand, the request was to create a readmission model using machine learning with a 75 sensitivity value. So we achieved that. And one of the things that initially we were also tasked was to reduce the readmission rate from 10% to 20%, between 10 and 20, but we did not achieve that. What we achieved was close to 5% in 1 year. Even though we did an improvement, we have also to think about the risks of putting goals too high that we're not going to be able to achieve, right? Because this technology is also new, so we have to be careful about that. Another benefit in this is the AI2 and Microsoft, in this case, they joined forces to push AI on the world of coronavirus. That was from a year ago, this heading here. And not only that, but the government has put a lot of money behind grants and for AI. So there's a lot of interest because, again, as I mentioned, data is the new and probably the best asset that any country will have. And in that case, just investing in how to manage that information and mining this information is what is a key component. So here is my colleague, Jeff is going to talk about protein folding, but here is one of the things that we also were looking into a year ago, and that we have made big strides. So we need a more money investment into this technology. All right, so in the short-term goals for this in the clinical side is to using it, as I mentioned, in problems that we call shallow problems and deep problems. And the deep problems are those ones like readmissions. It appears to be really easy to do and implement or work on, but it's not really that easy. It's hard. Also predicting patient deterioration, right? So for instance, in sepsis or hemodynamic changes on the patient population, for instance, in the ICU, those are things that are important to work on, and those are problems that we've been working for a long time, and we haven't been able to have a solution today that actually we can rely on. Predicting the general patient health, that is also what it was called before population health, and that was replaced by the now precision medicine realm, and that is also an important part in the clinical setting on what are the projects that we need to work on. Here's also the publication, right? So the more that we know, the more that we do research on machine learning in medicine, the better. You can see on the graph on the left is an exponential growth since the 2006, 2007. Right now we have a lot of in almost 10,000, I think is the number for 2020. And then again, the studies, specialties that we are looking into is radiology, pathology, and also oncology. And that is, those are the three main fields that right now are important in the field. But right behind on those are the pharmaceutical also research is important as well. Here is on a slide just to put the point across about the image and how image is so important in the world of machine learning. So there is a contest called the ImageNet, and every year, starting in 2010, at least for this slide, it's been going down for what is called the error rate, right? So the human performance zone is between 5 and 10% of how to recognize images. Now the algorithms are below that, which is really scary and also incredible. And at the same time, that's why the industry is going more and more into what we can do in medicine with images. These algorithms are really doing really well. Also, it's not a change from the traditional methods from statistics to machine learning, but it's one more toolkit. So it's a natural progression that is occurring. So for instance, in this slide, using the traditional methods to create a survival analysis curves and the methods you see on the upper side of the slide are those traditional methods that everyone is familiar with, but they're being also not replaced, but more or less compared to what we can do with machine learning methods, and we're getting better results today with that. So the industry is going in that way, and it's an inevitable change that is occurring. At the long term, we have what we call the precision medicine, and here is the definition for that. And here at Johns Hopkins All Children's, we're working on that model, and basically it's collecting the data from individuals, creating what we call the digital human digital twin. And with that in mind, we're collecting data from the sensors. You can call it Fitbit or an Apple Watch or all of those sports bands or activity bands, and we're using that data to create that human digital twin, and also to get the patients to get better once they have different procedures here at the hospital. Here's more or less what is the concept of that for the Internet of Medical Things. And when you collect all of this data, you need to start with high fidelity physiological data. Data from EMRs, you have to integrate that data, is really important. Also the hospital consumer grade devices. And the reason that we're collecting those from those devices is because we don't know the baseline for the patients, right? So when you go to the hospital, it's because you have some illness or you're above or below your baseline. And then we need to collect that data before, during, and after. And that's what we're doing here with this conceptual model. And also we're going to, on top of that, we're going to create the analytics, and we have the machine learning engine that we've been working on, and that's going to cause the paradigm shift, which is not only to do the diagnosis, but treatment to prevention. That is what is the important concept here. So it's the right information in the right context at the right time, and machine learning is helping us to achieve that. Our current state here, for at least for the physiological data, and that's part of that big conceptual model, is to capture all the data that is coming from every monitored hospital. And so far, we have the largest pediatric data repository in the country as far as vital signs. And we have been able to put everything together in what we call the physiological data warehouse, PDW. And on top of that, we are creating our algorithm to have different steps in there, right? So one is the data integration. Second, to help us to use this data in near real time to provide some access to decisions to the physicians. And finally, we have a data user interface, which is also helping us with the process of making decisions. So here is a zoom in into that what we call A, B, and C. In there, A is basically the data integration module, which is really, really important how to integrate those. And there are lots of companies out there that are putting together lots of technology that is working really well. And that's how to integrate all of data from different data sources. And that's a key step. Then we have the component B, which is a lot of intellectual property as well, which is creating these models. And no institution, no company will be able to create all of them. So there is a lot of opportunity for collaboration to create these modules for real time of use of machine learning. And finally, in front of that, you have to have a nice user interface. When I say nice, not only the nice colors, but a good design so people can use it in the right terms. Because basically the user interface is what, at the end of the day, is the face of your application. So you can have a really well-designed machine learning module and have integrated data, but if your user interface is not impressive or good, then people are not going to work with it. And all of these modules have intellectual property. So there's lots of opportunity to develop different technologies in these three domains. Here's a case study that compiles some of the things that we have done through the IoMT, Internet of Medical Things, and also the Human Digital Twin. So for this study is the scoliosis, right? So these are pictures of two patients, and you have the severity of those are different between the two of them. And what we're doing is we're following these patients, we're giving them the devices, in this case a Fitbit, and to see how their levels of activity are every day for the first couple of weeks before the procedure. And we follow that during the procedure and after the procedure. So we are able to measure things like how long are these patients going to take to get back to the baseline, to the level of activity. So we can measure the number of steps, the number of hours they've been sleeping, and also the activity on the screen, because that has a lot of impact on actually learning from that activity, electronic activity, how this patient is actually going back to baseline or not. Here is one on the right-hand side. On December 14th was the hemoglobin on this patient and the heart rate. And after the procedure, the hemoglobin went down and the heart rate went up, which was expected. This is a quick example of that. Now I'm going to give back the floor to Geoffrey. He's going to speak the next part of this presentation.
Oh, thank you very much, Luis, and very, very fantastic presentation. So hi, my name is Jeff Gray. I'll be discussing the application of artificial intelligence in the chemical and the clinical space. I'll be going through a little bit kind of what AI is, very briefly, just sort of defining it. And then we talk a little bit about some examples of what our team works on, and also some of the examples in chemical and clinical space that might be of interest. So I'll first talk a little bit about our center. Johns Hopkins All Children's is an academic research hospital. We're a research center in that hospital. It's also affiliated with Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. We really specialize in data science, artificial intelligence, visual analytics, and some data collection as well. So all things data science, you might say. We have multiple open collaborations with academic and industrial institutions, and we are very open to collaboration and moving into new spaces and new fields. So I'll talk a little bit about the aim here, what to discuss. So machine learning, as Luis mentioned, is really a natural evolution of statistical techniques. In the same way that application of statistics to medicine and many other fields in the early 20th century, really ended up kind of revolutionizing these fields and establishing what we use now for medicine, as herd medicine. Machine learning is sort of a natural evolution of that, and saying instead of treating someone as trying to match them to a statistical population, let's treat them as an individual and use their individual data to produce better outcomes. And that's true for many things, anything from e-commerce to clinical decision support. So the current adoption of ML and AI sort of has lagged behind some of the capabilities that it has. And I'll give you an example. I saw that a lot in the defense industry, that people were using techniques maybe 20 or 30 years behind what the current techniques really are. And that's true for many places. They say do AI, they do something, and then that's it's not really the sort of the cutting edge. It's really not sort of what the true capabilities are that are being published. So this presentation kind of seeks to motivate wider industry, as Daniel mentioned, the adoption of machine learning is sort of the next step from the statistical models and methodologies that are currently being employed. So I always say, what is AI? I know many of you might already know this, but I do this because it does vary by industry. There's a good example, again, back into the defense industry. AI to them can mean something very different. It can mean robotics, it can mean collaborative capabilities, that rules-based expert systems, things that we wouldn't necessarily, maybe isn't what at the forefront of what most people would consider in the deep learning and machine learning. So it is comprised of a wide variety of subfields, and you can use them for a wide variety of things here. But here, when I talk about AI, I generally am going to be meaning machine learning and deep learning explicitly, as opposed to the many other subfields that can fall into this category. And if I am talking about one of those subfields, I will explicitly state that to avoid any confusion. Sort of the current state, it's moving from theory to practice in multiple fields. Example of that is medicine. It's here. There was a 2020 Stanford clinicians report that was talking about how the rise of the data-driven physician, where AI is being implemented in clinical decision making. It's being implemented in numerous parts of the medical field, and people are working even more so to get that to implement it even to an even greater extent. But it's not just that. It's also image recognition, speech recognition. You think of Siri being able to recognize and act on the things that you say to it, and those kinds of interactions. Image recognition for anything from identifying facial recognition, or other maybe slightly more concerning developments of being able to recognize people in public. And then e-commerce as well. It's very common. Algorithmic trading has been around for a long time, but sort of moving to more advanced algorithms and an AI-based approach. So this becoming more commonly used in numerous industries, and some in a very cutting edge kind of way, and some are sort of still playing catch up. So another example, sort of for the chemical information space, chemical informatics is, if you look at the publications of, say, chemical information journals, you can really see the increase in the number of AI-based publications, whereas maybe 20 years ago or 15 years ago, it was more data mining almost, or some of the more rules-based approaches. For instance, if you wanted to predict structure-activity relationships, that was more, it wasn't AI driven, and they're trying to move more with the advent of the large amount of data that's really available in the chemical space, moving more towards artificial intelligence or machine learning, deep learning approaches. It's also progressing in terms of drug design, drug discovery. It's a large, as I'm sure you're aware, a large motivating factor for that is being able to design in silico drugs, or to use information obtained from things like high throughput screening to design better drugs, or identify what should move on to the next phase of the clinical trials. So I'm going to show you a picture, a video here of, this is from 2010. Let's see if I can get this to work. Yep, this is from 2010. This is out of the Panda Lab in Stanford. And this basically is a simulation of a millisecond protein folding. It's the an N-terminal domain of a ribosome. Well, protein, it's only 39 amino acids. And this was sort of the promise for a long time in the pharmaceutical industry, starting in the late 80s or early 90s. Hey, you can use these in silico techniques. We don't need to do high throughput screening anymore. We don't need to do some of these other approaches. We can use simulation to sort of fold a protein from the beginning, from ab initio, and then really use that to then sort of design drugs, that structure for drug design. So here you can see it folding, and to put this into context for those who are not very familiar, there's only at this time, even now, only a few labs that can really do something like this. This is a very extensively difficult process and computationally expensive process, and really intractable for proteins, more or less anything of interest that would, of 100 amino acids even, or 50 or 60. D.E. Shaw is able to do it. The Stanford lab's able to do it. There's really only a couple. So this is not a technique that is available to most research groups. But the idea being that you can fold a protein ab initio. We can use this for drug design. That's something that sort of the holy grail in that field, is that if you can take a protein and you can look at differences in structure based on changes in the amino acid sequence, and then determine that without the going through an experimental process, or to augment an experimental process, it's really the overall hope and the idea, because it's substantially less expensive than firing up an X-ray crystallographer, or X-ray crystallography, or NMR, or any of the other techniques. So there was a lot of promise at that time. Shaw also released a 2010 paper, a 2011 paper, talking about folding of 11 different structures to within an angstrom and a half, which is generally considered X-ray quality. So X-ray crystallography quality is about an angstrom and a half from the native state. And so, yeah, this was made possible through just a lot of people who donated their time through folding at home. But again, this is not something that's typically available to most people, because of how computationally expensive and the resources it takes to do something like this, even on a 39 amino acid sequence, which is small, I'm sure as many of you know. So that was 2010. It was about just over 11 years ago, or just about 11 years ago that this happened. So I'm sure as many of you have heard, and was also mentioned in the previous discussion, previous talk. Let's see if it's next slide. Sorry, there we go. Yeah, there was a huge leap in or application of AI to biophysics in AlphaFold to actually determine the structure of proteins, which is pretty remarkable. So the graph you're seeing on the right is there's a protein folding competition, CASP, and the idea being that you can, predict, different labs will predict the native state, or as close as they can, the structure of different sequences, and then they can, they get an aggregate score, and then every 2 years will announce a winner. So what you can see here is pretty remarkable, is that AlphaFold and AlphaFold 2 both clearly outperform all of the other approaches, whether they be sort of fragment-based approaches, or an attempt to do ab initio folding, or some combination thereof. Or they just, and AlphaFold 2 in particular is almost equivalent to experimentally determined structures. So this is the same kind of technological innovation that you might attribute to, say, space flight for this field. This is a huge capability, or the ability to, hit supersonic speeds for air travel. This is an enormous leap forward, and if you look at 2016, even 2018 to 2020, in about a 2 to 4 year time frame. So it's won the previous 2 CASP contests by a lot, clearly outperforming all the other techniques and approaches, even impressively, in a sense, knowledge-based approaches. And it's experimental quality, and it can solve the unique thing here too is it can solve structure substantially faster than other methods. It's again the equivalent to sort of space travel of saying I can go to the moon on the budget of what it would take for me to buy a Ferrari, which, you know, Ferrari's a lot, but not nearly as much as a rocket would cost. So it's exceptionally impressive in terms of computational performance, speed, and accuracy. And it's a real leap forward for what was really considered a primary problem in structural biology for at least 70 years. Spanning from the Leventhal paradox. So it's an exceptional push forward. It really shows how AI can revolutionize a field like that. I'll talk a little bit about one of the things that we're working on too. This is sort of prediction of perioperative adverse events from anesthesia. For those who don't know, these are just negative outcomes when you undergo anesthesia, and they can be life-threatening. They can be quite severe. So our goal was to sort of predict those from information that was available at either time of the consultation, which is 2 weeks prior to surgical, or the time of the surgical on the day of surgery. That kind of lets us identify who might be at risk, not only what surgery center they might need to go to, do they need to do inpatient or outpatient, but who also might be at risk. And this was, to put this, as Luis was talking about, for data size, often when we hear about deep learning, we're thinking at least hundreds and hundreds of thousands, whereas in this particular case we're talking about 30-some thousand. So it also highlights kind of you can generate useful models even from a relatively small amount of data by comparison to today's standards. So you don't need massive amounts of data to do something and to do something useful. This was also, I mentioned that this was I nominated as a finalist for the Kosaka Award at the IARS conference. So it's it's interesting work. It's good work. Yeah, we'll move on to then something that might be more interest to this particular group. Co-crystal formation prediction. This was some work done about 2 or 3 years ago, in which they used data from the Cambridge Structural Database to identify the formation of co-crystals, which is an excellent opportunity for the development of commercial products. Predict whether compounds, so several models were developed that can predict whether compounds can actually form co-crystals. So it could be used to also determine which features contribute to the predictions. What you're seeing in that right here is you're seeing that this is the model that they used. And these are the number of features. So they tried using all the features, and they tried using reduced feature sets and sort of simplifying their model. You can see these predictions, it says the accuracy. These predictions are relatively useful, relatively good. And sort of, you don't need a lot of features even to predict 900. It's been starting with 2207. You don't see much of a reduction in accuracy of the model or performance of the model. But useful, some real applications of this are even for, trying to predict novel co-crystals, trying to identify maybe alternative co-crystals that can be formed that might be less expensive. And, if you're talking about, in mass production scale, even 2% less expensive can really drive down the cost and save a lot of money. So there's a huge financial incentive to using these techniques as well, not just in terms of improving your models or improving other things or kind of, doing what everyone else is doing, but really you can save a substantial amount of money. Another example I'm going to talk about is the analysis of pharmaceutical emulsions. This was published by GlaxoSmithKline. This was a vision processing problem, which AI is quite well suited for. As you know, emulsions are widely used in the pharmaceutical industry, but it's challenging. It has to be done by, each emulsion has to be looked at by an expert under specialized equipment, which really is extremely expensive and time consuming. So the idea here is that they wanted to predict 4 quality-based categories. So just, it's acceptable, it's marginal, it's a target, or it's unacceptable. So what they did is they took a set that was labeled by experts, so about 900 or so. They broke it up into 2 separate cross-validation and independent batch, and then they trained several models on it, and they found actually random forest performed quite well. As you can see here, it was 96% accurate on the independent batch, which really is extremely useful. Now they don't have to, in theory, they don't have to use humans to look at these emulsions and try to determine if it's, if it's acceptable or not, and label them. They can actually just do this in a more automated way. So it's a good example of sort of an everyday pharmaceutical issue that was solved using a relatively high accuracy and relatively high fidelity using machine learning. The final thing I'm going to talk about is the drug dosage recommendation in pediatrics. This was out of a dissertation out of Switzerland, but it was really more of a proof of concept. But this is a good example of where there's a ton of capability here and collaborative opportunity. So it was really just sort of looking to see, can we use data extracted from the electronic medical records and look at what providers are, and look at what dosage recommendations are being ordered by providers, and can we actually learn what that is and use a machine learning algorithm model to predict or to actually give dosage recommendations. So they tested a couple of different substances, and they tested a couple of different models. They found, yeah, you can get relatively, okay results, and but there's a lot of room here for growth, especially given the amount of data that's available in the EMR for consumption and the continual update of that data. So this is a prime example of an area that is under probably in some sense understudied, especially when integrating with the EMR. And there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration and for work in an area like this. So with that, are there any questions? I'll open up the floor to questions.
Thank you very much for wonderful presentations. I have one question here from the audience. What is the level of error in your AI model, since for pediatrics, their perceptions are highly variable?
I think I can interpret that that question. I'll take it, and Jeff, you can chime in. So one of the things in the in medicine, right, not only for pediatrics, but in terms of medicine, for AI, a good target or baseline that we're trying to achieve is about not only the accuracy and of the model in terms of the sensitivity and specificity, but that depends on the problem at hand, right? So I would say, for instance, in the examples that I gave initially in the presentation about dermatology and the breast cancer, those were, supposed to be successful if they passed the threshold about inaccuracy about 0.75 or 0.80. Because the reason behind that is because humans, we have shown through different studies that human error rate is about 15%, right, or 25% in that range. So if we're doing more or less with AI or machine learning achieving the same performance than humans, that is a given that we're doing a good job of developing these models. Anything beyond that is considered a gain or a win, and then that's probably the main performance metric that I will say. But again, it's also with both the sensitivity and the specificity and the problem at hand that will change what we are going to use as the performance metric. Okay.
Thank you. Actually, in a related question that you kind of alluded to, how do you determine what level of error is acceptable using AI?
That's a great question. As Luis sort of did allude to, it comes down to human performance or the performance of whatever is in that space. So as a good example, if I told you that, hey, I have a rules-based system that's accurate 80% of the time, if I came to you with a machine learning model and said this is accurate 75% of the time, people wouldn't want to implement it for good reason. Right? Why would I reduce accuracy? If I came to you and said I have something that's accurate 90% of the time, then obviously it's something people are going to want to implement. And in terms of error, so we use different metrics depending upon what we're trying to accomplish and upon sort of the data. Good examples. One common problem, especially in medicine, but in many fields, is imbalanced data. So what that means is that you are trying, for instance, if you have a classification problem, you have two classes, you might have one class is far more common in the data set than the other. And so the model will learn that class, the one that's more common, more easily. And so our error might be, we'll change the metrics that we use in order to try to sort of balance out that error. But in some cases, for example, the apricot model that I showed you for the anesthesia, we're not going to have a very accurate prediction of PAEs, but we can very accurately predict if you're not going to have a PAE. So it's sort of, identifying what the data will let us do, and then sort of trying to optimize from there. But that's definitely that's an excellent question.
Thank you. So one question that we have is, related to pediatric products. Acceptability is one of the biggest challenges that we face. You talked a little bit about image recognition, and do you feel that AI ML could use face recognition to tell if a child likes or does not like the medication that they're taking?
Absolutely. Your challenge. So yeah, the answer is yes. It's well suited. It's very well suited for a problem like that. The challenge is, and as with everything, is getting the data and accurately labeling the data. So as an example, if you give me a data set and say it's ready to go, ready to train, I can get it training in under an hour more than likely. That's not the long pole in the tent. The challenge is getting that data initially. So if you were going to go do something, I think that's an excellent example of where AI can be used in this space. But you would need experts, either feedback from the child or someone to look at, or parents, or something like that, that would be able to identify, hey, did the child like it or not, and sort of quantifying whether they, how much did they not like it, or how much did they like it. So if you see them and they get it, and it's like, oh yeah, this is the face of them being happy, then yes, you could say, hey, they liked it, we labeled it, and then we can use that to train.
Yeah, so one of the other things in there is that those are hard problems. Those are not easy problems, right? So that's where the difference between what we call shallow problems that are basically easy to accomplish a certain type of performance. But deep problems like that one, it not only depends on the data that you can collect, but also the quality, as Jeff mentioned, in real time. So one of the things that we have to think is the closer that the data that we collect is to real time, the more expensive is going to get, and expensive in both computationally and also money, right? So those are the type of things that we have to have a large bank account to actually, not to develop the model, but for the implementation of the model, right? So examples that I gave also initially is a lot of these technologies that were developed in silico, when you go out to the real world, sometimes fail because they didn't think about all the problems that they will face in terms of collecting the data, sending. So one of the examples that I can give you is when Google deployed the retinopathy application in Thailand. The model was developed here in the States with high quality images. When they went there and into the real world, the pictures that they were taken, or the images, they were not high quality. So that was one problem. The second problem was in the workflow, in terms of uploading the images to the model for the model to actually run, and the internet access was not provided. So there are things that maybe the model is really well done, but the problems that are not well thought in the beginning, it can kill a technology like this or solution like this.
Absolutely. And one thing that I would like to, Luis also kind of alluded to, just sort of add on there is, when you build a model, it's not just, you don't just build, deploy, and you're not just done. It's a whole infrastructure to be able to keep the model basically determined that, hey, is the data it's getting, is it still consistent with what it was trained on? Is the model degrading with performance? And then sort of identifying when it does, and then retraining and redeploying the model. So it's for an industry solution, it's going to require some kind of DevOps approach, or basically what they call ML ops.
Thank you. Okay, one last question from the audience. What are the controls that we put in place to reduce bias, since AI is only as good as the data that is put in by humans?
Yeah, so that's an outstanding question. The answer to that is that's a very challenging problem. One of the things that you can do is you can sort of, I've seen things with people try to use AI to police AI. I'm not sure how accurate that necessarily will be, but I think ultimately at this point, one sort of from the ground up, making sure you have, data, representative, equitable data, and aren't just pulling from certain groups or certain things, that you have a good distribution of data. So the training data is the first place that you start. And then on top of that, really kind of monitoring after the fact, and sort of in the same way that we have penetration testers from a cybersecurity perspective, sort of testing networks, seeing how safe and secure they are. I think sort of employing something like that for machine learning, having somebody say, hey, I'm going to try just interacting with this a little bit and see what I get. And a good example of that is GPT 2 and 3. There was a recent article in IEEE talking about GPT-3 and some of the extremely toxic responses that would come out of it, and that people found that because they had researchers who were there plugging data, plugging questions into it, saying, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And then seeing what the responses are. So you still need some level of not only good data, but also still human oversight and sort of a stress testing of the system to make sure that you're not either developing, you don't have something that's toxic or something that's biased, or you're not developing it somehow over time.
Yeah, another component of that is also on what Jeff was saying about the training set. So a model that is developed, let's say in Switzerland, right? Just to pick a country in there from Daniel, that is going to be deployed, for instance, in Colombia or in Panama, right? Or it's not going to work because the population is different. So the generalization of a model depends also on how diverse is the data set to do the training and testing, and that is an important role into how you deploy this technology successfully. So the implied bias from the developers that has been taken care of, like maybe during the last 10 years, and people know about it, but it's not only that, but it's also the data, right? As I mentioned. So those are two things that we have to take into consideration with developing these technologies moving forward.
Thank you very much. I just want to pass it over to Daniel for one last comment, if you'd like to, before we close.
Sure, this is Daniel. I think we're towards the end of the time slot here. But I think we had a great excursion into AI/ML insights, particularly from a pediatric hospital perspective. We probably have seen and learned things that we are not familiar with, but as I said in the beginning, based on the presentation from Luis and from Jeff, I would like everybody to who is working in formulation development to think about that, maybe also reach back out to us for the IQ Pediatric Working Group, and then hopefully apply more, learn more, and in a year or so that we can then show real applications and show progress in this field. AI is here, it's not going away, and it's definitely an area where we could get some help in making progress, developing age-appropriate formulations that are acceptable, not only in one hospital, but also on a worldwide basis. I think with that, I would like to again thank the speakers and to thank you in the audience for listening to us. And back to Beth to close the session.
Okay, thank you.